It was May of last year and I had just signed the lease on a new house. It turned out the refrigerator didn't come with the deal. I'd spent most of my money on the house, so I started looking for a cheap one at garage sales. I couldn't find any that way. Then, I remembered Craigslist. After just 10 minutes, one popped up, not far from me. I called the number and a nice lady answered. She said the refrigerator was still for sale, but she couldn't guarantee it would still be there when I arrived. So, against my better judgment, I asked for her PayPal and sent her the $75. She sent me an email confirming she'd got the money and we set a date for me to pick it up. That Saturday, I texted her, letting her know I was on my way. The house was a nice, ranch-style place. Probably built in the 80s. I knocked and this hot, brown-haired girl in very short cutoffs answered. After I picked my job from the ground, I asked for Sunny. She said that was her and showed me inside. I had zero reason to be nervous. Like the outside, the house was nicely furnished and smelled clean. We made small talk for a few minutes, until this big dude, at least 6 feet 5 inches, covered in tattoos, appeared from the kitchen. She introduced him as John, her boyfriend, and she said he would take me to the refrigerator. She disappeared to the back of the house and I never saw her again. John led me through the kitchen to the garage. He opened the door and pointed to the refrigerator. It was all the way across from me, almost sitting against the overhead door. I could barely see it because the garage itself was so dark. I asked him if there was a light, but he said it had broken and they hadn't had the chance to fix it. No big deal. He had to open the overhead door so I could move it out anyway. I asked him to raise it, but he said it was also broken. He apologized. I was just going to have to bring it through the house. This annoyed me, but I had no choice at that point. There was a little light shining in from the house. It was going to have to do. I took 2 steps, maybe 3, into the garage before I realized there was plastic on the floor. I looked down and saw that it covered the entire floor. This was when I began getting nervous. I couldn't think of any reason why it would be there except. I stopped in my tracks. John's shadow began drawing closer. Then, off in the corner, to my left, I heard a shuffling noise. Everything inside me said to leave. Suddenly, I turned around and walked quickly back to the open door. I was surprised to see how close John actually was to me, but I kept going. I weaved around him and said, "I forgot my dolly in my truck. I'll be right back." There was a dolly leaning against the wall not far away. He pointed to it and began to say something, but I didn't stop. When I was sure he wasn't behind me anymore, I ran the rest of the way, out the door, all the way to my truck. I hopped in it and tore out of there. I don't know what happened after that. I got a few texts from Dawn, but I erased them without reading them. When I got home, I logged onto Craigslist to report them. I was shocked to see the listing was already gone. I looked around for another 30 minutes to make sure. They must have erased it right away. I also called the police and made a report. They seemed a little dubious of my claim, but promised to check it out. I never heard from them again and I don't much care. I'm alive, that's good enough for me. As for the $75, there was no way I was going to ask for it back. It wasn't worth getting involved with those freaks again. I haven't gone on the site since then. The whole system strikes me as risky these days. Anyway, I got lucky a week later. There was a garage sale in my neighborhood that had a used refrigerator. It was $100, but a lot nicer than the other one and serves its purpose just fine. As I wrap this up, I don't want to give people the wrong idea. I don't think Craigslist is dangerous for you to use. Thousands of folks get stuff off of there every day, with no trouble. After what happened to me, I just don't think it's worth the risk. However, if you do find something on the site you just have to have, be careful. Bring a friend when you go to get it. If you can, meet in a public place, during the day. Most importantly though, use your head. If the situation seems sketchy, bail. It may mean the difference between life and death. Yours. This may sound strange to some people, but I collect movies on VHS. My collection is currently at over 1,000 and growing daily. I spend my weekends searching through thrift shops and online sellers for interesting and hard-to-find cassettes. Sometimes, I'll purchase lots or boxes of tapes. These often include home recordings of forgotten television shows and family memories deemed no longer important. A time was, I loved nothing more than to cuddle up and watch them with my girlfriend. Although most turn out to be boring, I occasionally stumble upon something very special. A couple of years ago, I was browsing through Craigslist and came across a box of cassettes. It was taking up space and they wanted it gone. Free to the first person to show up. So, I pounced on the deal. An hour later, I was parked in front of my TV with a big box of tapes. The haul totaled 44. Many were blank or home recordings lacking labels. Oh well, I always love a mystery. I had a few hours before work and watched a tape or two on fast forward. The first had an episode of the original Battlestar Galactica, and the other was blank. Once I was done, I pushed the box into the closet and left for work. It would stay there for another 9 months untouched and forgotten. In the meantime, I bought countless more tapes and my collection began to take over my spare bedroom. I built a massive shelf to store it all and inventoried each tape as I shelved them. This is how I remembered the box in my closet. When I realized I hadn't finished watching each tape, I set aside an evening with my girlfriend to do so. I remember that night like it was yesterday. My girlfriend, Brittany, arrived just after 7 p.m. We made dinner together and had Butterfinger ice cream for dessert. About 9, we crawled up together and started the first tape. The next few hours, we saw a recording of NBC Primetime from 1987, 3 movies from HBO, and a wedding from 1991. Brittany especially loved that one. The 4th tape was also a wedding. I watched as much as I could before opting on a pee break and having a smoke. When I stepped away, she was fully engrossed in the ceremony. After I hit the head, I slipped out on the porch for a cigarette. That only took 5 minutes, max. Before I returned to the bedroom, I grabbed a refill of water. I was in the process of doing this when I heard Brittany scream my name. I ran into the room as fast as possible. She had her hands over her mouth and her eyes were the size of saucers. Her gaze seemed to be fixed on the TV screen. What? I said. I leaned over the TV but saw nothing but a blue screen. I asked her again. She remained speechless, but pressed rewind on the VCR. A few seconds later, she pressed play and patted on the spot next to her. I assumed this meant, sit down, so I did. The tape began as the happy couple prepared to cut the cake. I got annoyed and asked, "What is going on with you?" "Wait a second, it's coming." The words were so sudden, I jumped. So, I kept watching, waiting for some mystery thing to occur. The couple were feeding one another cake and the recording cut out. Static blared at us for a moment before a new recording began. Now, a man was staring at us. He looked to be starting a video camera. When he moved away from the camera, you could see a nude woman laying on a bed. The guy hopped on the bed and they began doing it. "All right, baby," I said in a joking way. Brittany snapped and told me to shut up. By this point, I was completely dumbfounded. I almost felt embarrassed watching it. I'd never thought of myself as the voyeuristic type. The couple continued coupling and the woman whispered, "Choke me." He did and the sex began to peak. I'm thinking, kinky, to myself. Not my thing, but to each his own. The man continues to choke the woman. She began gasping for air, but he didn't stop. Even when she grabbed his arms, he kept going. He completed the act and let go of her throat. The couple laid quietly together for a few moments and said nothing. Suddenly, the man turns toward the woman. He stares for a few seconds, then raises to his elbows and starts shaking her. The dude's yelling her name and occasionally slapping her cheeks, but she's not moving. This is when I started to catch on. The man then stands up, now holding his partner by the shoulders and shaking her. Still no movement. This is when he started to catch on. He eventually stops and just stares into her empty eyes. No way, man. I'm beginning to freak out, now. No way, dude. Brittany is silent. The man sat down on the edge of the bed, his head buried in his hands. A low sobbing can be heard. This goes on for a few moments before he remembers the camera. In one long motion, he reaches out and slams his hand down on it. The blaring of the static returned, and I sat struck dumb. The hissing continued until Brittany, finally, pressed stop. Dude! It was the only word I could get out. I'd never seen anything like that before. Brittany turned toward me and asked what we should do. I, honestly, had no idea. I still couldn't believe it was real. Maybe it wasn't. Let me have a smoke and I'll consider our options. I retreated outside to think. When I returned, I proposed the idea that it may have been fake. I don't want to go to the cops until I'm sure it's real. No way do I want to become the butt of some trolls. Joke? Okay. If she had any misgivings, she kept them to herself. She may have still been in shock. I know I was. Our evening was clearly over. I suggested she stay the night, but she declined. No big deal. I'd have a hard time getting any sleep until I knew the truth. My first goal was to contact the tape's previous owner. I knew for sure the man in the tape wasn't the dude I got the box from. There was a good chance he may know his identity, though. My emails went unanswered. I tried to contact him by phone, but his number no longer worked. I finally went by his place and discovered he had moved. Without a way to contact him, my options had run out. Off to the police, it would be. The cops said they would watch the video and contact me if they had any additional questions. It was out of my hands now. In the weeks during my search, I'd seen very little of Brittany. She always had some excuse. I figured it was only a matter of time before she ended things completely. Another week would pass before she'd call. I can't do this anymore. I haven't slept for weeks. All I see is that dead woman. There was no sense in arguing. I wished her a good life and hung up. It would have been heartless to expect her to let it go. God knows I'd had my share of bad dreams over the past month. Things like that tend to affect women a lot harder than us. If her feelings change in the future, I'm not hard to find. Hundreds of cassettes have passed through my hands since then. With room now becoming scarce, I've taken to selling blank tapes and extra copies of films. With Brittany no longer in the picture, I admit curling up in bed and watching tapes has lost a bit of its luster. Most of my viewing takes place in the living room now. To this day, every time I put an unlabeled tape in the player, I get a little tinge of fear. Will I see someone die? I've had a lot of time to think it over. When you collect something that captures a moment in time, a sliver of someone's life, you never know what terrible secret you may uncover. All this happened because I saw a YouTube video about a shelf unit stereo. I'd been looking for one for some time. The addition of a decent turntable sold me. My first stop was Amazon. Unfortunately, they wanted more than I could afford. So, I hopped on eBay. I came across a few there, but all the sellers' feedback ratings were lower than I liked. At first, I thought I was SOL. Then I remembered Craigslist. Within 10 minutes, I'd found my stereo. I contacted the seller and we agreed to meet at Walmart around 8 p.m. I grabbed the cash and left about 7:30. Our arrangement was to meet close to the building. I drove around the lot for a good 15 minutes before I gave up. I just figured I'd been trolled. However, as I headed toward the exit by the highway, I saw two men waving their arms. It had to be the sellers, so I pulled over and parked. I asked why they had parked so far from the store. One guy claimed there were no parking spaces when they arrived. From what I could see, there were plenty. I let it go though. There was no point in pissing them off. Maybe they were just stupid. There's plenty of folks like that around here. The taller of the two made small talk for a few minutes. I didn't want to be rude, so I humored him. The moment he stopped speaking, I tried to get the sale in motion. While we were talking, I hadn't noticed that the other guy had snuck up behind me. When I pulled the cash from my pocket, I got a hard nudge in my back. This caused me to jerk upright. When I looked at the tall guy, he had a pistol pointed at me. My instinct was to yell for help, but the two guns suggested against it. It was obviously a robbery. The tall guy didn't have to ask. I handed the cash to him and he kindly said thank you. I hoped that was the end of it. They'd drive away and I'd be left scared and feeling stupid. But I was wrong. The tall guy demanded I give up my phone. That was going to hurt more than the money. It was a brand new iPhone. I reluctantly pulled it from my pocket and took one last look. This entire time, the other guy didn't say a word. Now they had what they wanted. The two men got in their car and drove away, leaving me shaking in fear and feeling like a fool. I'd convinced myself I'd taken the proper measures to prevent stuff from going wrong, but the moment they changed the plan, I went ahead anyway, despite any misgivings I had. Now I was minus $100 in cash and a $400 phone. Without a phone, I had to walk the 200 yards to the store to call the cops. The employees tried to be sympathetic, but I'm sure they thought I was stupid too. The police arrived soon and took my statement. I respect them for being honest with me. We all knew the guys probably wouldn't be caught. And they haven't been. Almost 4 years on, and I have yet to hear of an arrest. I suppose I should be grateful it didn't cost me more. Had my assailants been of the mind to, I could have paid the ultimate price.